Alright, here's a very quick video on ITB, friction syndrome, and things to do for it. Again, this video really could go for a long time because there's so many things we would have to explore. But just to give you a rough idea on the things we might look at and things not to worry about as well. So the first one being ITB stretching, and Dylan here is showing us an ITB stretch. Right, this is pretty much a useless stretch, so I would never worry about it. But what the purpose of it, most people would tell you, is that you're going into that position here will stretch the IT band. In theory, that's all great. You're stretching some of the hip as well, but it'll change absolutely nothing because it's actually going to just remain tight if you move poorly. So whatever you do here won't change anything at how you move. All right, so you can just throw that one in the bin if you're doing it right now, because it's not going to help you. The next thing that we might see that is commonly associated with this ITB is the foam rolling. All right, so now foam rolling has its purpose. A lot of people will tell you never to foam roll the ITB because it's a ligament and you're going to compress it, and maybe that's true. I would find, and in this case he's not rolling on the ITB either, he's rolling on the glutes. Right, and the glutes are actually a big problem here because they are often weak, but they also can be chronically tight. So tight doesn't mean strong. All right, so sometimes they're in such a poor position to bend and do all the movements, which is what forces the ITB to kick into action, because the glutes are so inhibited they can't stabilise the hip or move the hip correctly. So then the ITB, which is an assistant to the glutes, is forced to work harder, and it'll remain that way until you fix it. So this is the common ITB rolling, where you might roll from the top of the hip all the way down to the side of the knee. And it can be very painful for the person who has this. So obviously trying to roll something in pain just creates more pain. So I don't really see too much benefit to using it. And again, it doesn't really change the reason why it's tight in the first place. If you're doing this in combination with other exercises, it could be useful. I may probably prefer where Dylan was right at the start of it, around the top of the hip here, just doing around all of those bits. So so just sort of sticking here as opposed to going right over the side of it there. I find sometimes just around the top of the hip here is more beneficial, and obviously it's less painful. So then I might get them to just do that, just find that spot around the top of the glutes, even the quads as well. So I might roll through the quads. Again, I probably might find the stretching of the quads is more useful than rolling on them. I think some people just get addicted to the rolling. But again, it'll come back to weakness. So then we'll know that the glutes are probably not functioning as good as they can. So very simple exercises, the hip extension. You could do this on the floor. Nathan's just doing it on a Swiss ball. Again, just trying to learn how to get an anterior tilt at the bottom, maintain that neutral position at the top so you don't extra squeeze. This is where I see people ruin this exercise by excessively squeezing, and that's what causes their trouble. So an exercise that would have helped them is now going to ruin them. Obviously, usually it's like one leg that's the main problem, so then we might look at the strength of the single leg in this simple position first. If we spot any cramping in the hamstrings, that's confirmation of a weak glute. Right, and this is sort of leading to, which you'll see in a second, the real solution to the ITB is correcting the alignment through the foot and the hip, which is the same things we see with patella tracking problems and a lot of the other knee injuries. It's a different reaction for ITB. It's more the outside of the knee, where the ITB is just rubbing, and that's where it gets its name from, the friction. That's what gives it the excessive pain. It's almost like they get a bow leg, and we'll see people often with toes pointed in and things like that when they run. All right, so simple hip extension is a good correction. It won't be enough on its own though, so you'll need to do more stuff, which is where we'll show you now. With Nathan's going to use like a band here, and we're going to do some like abduction of the hip using. Now this exercise, by the way, can actually sort of exacerbate the ITB if it's really working too much. So that's where the foam roller might shut it down to begin with, because in this abduction of the hip, which should be done mainly by the glutes and assisted by the ITB, but what we might see with people with problems will be the ITB will try to do it all on its own, and you won't feel anything in the glutes, you'll just feel more ITB. And that's just a fault within that movement and the muscles, how they interact with each other, because it's the right exercise is just being performed poorly because of the muscle imbalance. So the only way to correct that is to sort of weaken it first through foam rolling, facilitate it with, by really getting your conscious reaction to getting the glutes working. On its own, it won't be enough, and this is where you have to come to standing. So this is where we'll see Dylan now trying to execute this in a lunge. So this is really applying that abduction of the hip, and in his mind, he's really working quite hard to feel like to push this leg out, like Nathan was lying on his side, that it's done by his glute on that right leg there. All right, he's got to really feel that it's not coming from the ITB to give this abduction of the hip, because that's what it's going to try to do. And it would have learnt that from poor running techniques and just from repetitions. That's why it gets nicknamed runner's knee, but also common in cyclists who toe point, and got poor sort of position of their pedals of their shoes, especially if they've got clipless shoes. Could be just from gym techniques, poor lunging technique, poor squatting technique, and it's just the excessive knee flexion that's sort of taken it to the next level. So this is an exercise where you're retraining the motor program, so the brain, how it communicates to all of the joints. If we were suspecting foot problems, we would do this barefoot as well, because sometimes it's the feet that are the problem. You can see why this video could really be like an hour long, not 10 minutes, which I'm trying to do for you. But just to give you an idea of how you've got to get away from just trying to treat the tightness, because it's really the weakness somewhere else that's the problem, and then how they interact. So we would start with the lunge first because it's easier, but the real issue, you can see, Dylan doesn't even have ITB friction, but you can see here when we try to get him into a single leg stance, the stability is so much harder, any weakness will instantly be revealed if he doesn't coordinate the hip to effectively maintain that perfect alignment that he had on that lunge. So we're always looking, so if that knee drifts in, we know that the ITB is going to try and pull it back. All right, and this is, you can see how this relates to a running action. So he's trying to learn how to keep perfect alignment through the entire lower limb there. All right, so he's got a good example there. So we're looking for the ankle, knee, hip, and this is where the glute should be sort of working hard. That big toe should be pointing down, so he's not trying to lift off through the toe there, through, like on the side of his foot, which is what we'll see a bit. Yeah, and this is a good sort of a stability exercise on its own. It's not enough though, because it doesn't strengthen. So if there is a weakness, we must strengthen. So then we come back to the two-leg stuff, and we'll do a deadlift where we can get the drive through the glutes coming into quite a hard exercise. So it's a progression of the last one, but this is really a stepping stone to the one we really want, where we want to apply load with what we were doing on the one before. But before that, we have to make sure that we've done many videos on the deadlift before, but it's really about keeping that perfect anterior tilt right throughout the lift there. So we're trying to see, can he keep that nice little curve in his spine, so his pelvis is tilting forward just ever so slightly to maintain neutral, and that's what loads his glutes up. We teach it in this hip extension, and hip extension is what you need when your leg kicks out behind you when you run. He's learning how to get it, all right? And then that'll help us to set the scene for the last exercise, where we're going to try and apply load within the single leg stance. So what we saw Dylan doing before, now Nathan's going to apply dumbbells to this, and he has to try and maintain everything like he did before. It doesn't have the band on there this time, but probably doesn't need it with the excessive load that he's got placed on his whole body. So again, we should see that perfect anterior tilt where he's keeping his lumbar curve, and there's that glute being loaded up big time. and from the front on, and you'll see I'll come around to the front here, we want to see if he maintains that alignment through the leg that we saw Dylan doing before. And again, sometimes people get, patella tracking problems, sometimes it's plantar fasciitis or shin splints, and sometimes it's ITB. It just depends on what sort of compensation occurs. But you can see here Nathan sort of lost a little bit of his alignment there, but having said that, he's pretty good neutral foot position. He could just be a little bit better there, but he's got 10 kilo, I think 12 kilo dumbbells each hand, and he just needs to try and maintain that alignment better. And if he can do that, then he's got to transfer it into good running technique, because if it's from running, which most of the times it is, that's what he's got to try and correct, because he could be great at all these gym things, but if his running form sucks, it's all undone. All right. So, but in terms of corrective exercises in the gym, these are just some of the main ones we might look at. It varies from person to person, but you can get an idea of how we started looking for a mobility restriction, and we probably need to look at the ankle as well. That's also a big factor in amongst these. Even above the pelvis, the thoracic spine and stuff, that also plays a role, all the different hip mobility things we would look at. But basically that's where our starting point is. And then we look at the simple stability things, going from the floor stuff, abduction, trying to get the glutes to work more than the ITB, and then progressing to standing. So with simple body weight to then load. 2 leg, 1 leg. All right. And if you can get the progression after this would be jumping, like landing with jumping and doing it at a high speed, as well as the running technique. And that's what you may have to work on for quite some time to fully get rid of the corruptive program that's running in the background that's ruining your movement. All right. So I hope that sort of gives you some ideas on what you can do for ITB friction. Again, there's quite a lot of things that you may need to consider, but this just gives you some ideas. All right, so have a look in the description under the video, because I chucked a whole heap of links in there to articles with more information and extra exercises we may use to help you out. All right, so I hope you've enjoyed that video, and we'll see you on our next one.